Hello, my name is Nairi. This is Fly Little Birds, and we're going to talk about empathy today. So this channel is around adoption, fostering, childhood trauma, but also just generally family. But empathy in this context, I'm talking about it in the context of PACE, P.A.C.E, which is a very popular therapeutic parenting program. And PACE stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And today we're just going to look at empathy, and we're going to look at it from several angles. So we're going to look at empathy from the perspective of how you might use it as a therapeutic parent. And we're going to look at empathy as to your child's development and how they will naturally develop empathy or not, as the case may be. So let's get into how you use empathy as a parent. The normal parenting regime that lots of people use are: I'm in control as the adult, you're the child, you need to do what I say, these are the rules, these are the boundaries, we need to stick to them. Empathy does turn that on its head a little bit, because if your child does something that's out of character or is not necessarily that great, instead of immediately coming in and saying, well, this is the consequences of this, this is what you've done and this is what we're going to do about it, you're going to stop and think. So the first thing about empathy is you take a breath and you stop and think. And you think about what it is your child's done and why that might be. I've got two adopted sons who are now teenagers. Yesterday we had a phone call from school saying, don't be alarmed in any way, but we've seen your son giving out some money to someone. Now this has happened before. The last time it happened, it was birthday money, and he gave out a lot of money. And whilst it was his money, it was a lot of money to give out to other people. Yes, I was angry to start with, because it was something that was happening behind our backs, and it was, it was going out, and that money had been given as gift by relatives. But part of me started to question why that might be happening in the back of my mind. And this is where you stop and think about your empathy and think about, what questions am I going to ask? So therefore you start to feel how he may be feeling. So the questions I asked around, first of all, why is the money gone? And you get all the defensive kind of answers, but then you get to the bottom of, why would you be handing money out to other children? And then the answer comes back in, because I haven't got any friends, or I want to be more popular. And then of course you've opened up the whole conversation about friendships and how friendships evolve, and actually that money is not going to make any difference in the long run. So when this happened yesterday, my first initial reaction was not to come in really hard, which maybe I would have done in the traditional parenting route. It would have been, you can't just hand out money, what are you doing, these are the consequences for that, you can't have any money to yourself anymore, we're not going to give you any extra money, or whatever you would put in place. The questions were immediately, did you give out money because you're having friendship problems, based on my empathy of what's happened before. Now, as it was, strangely, it wasn't to do with that. It was actually to do with him feeling compassionate for another child who wasn't able to buy lunch when they were on a school trip because he didn't have the funds there. And whichever way I came at it, that was the answer. So good job I used my empathy, because if I'd come straight in of, what are you doing? You're handing money out again. This is birthday money that you've been given as a gift. That's not allowed, blah, 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 blah. And come straight in there from a more traditional parenting route, then I would have got completely the wrong end of the stick. Empathy is about understanding where your children have come from, understanding how their backgrounds, their upbringings, if they've experienced abuse, maltreatment, neglect, how it's going to make them think in different situations. Now let me give you another example, if I may, which also happened yesterday. Yesterday was not a good day in many ways. I'd just come from my daughter's house where her children were giving her some trouble, straight into home where my children seem to be very down. And I want to throw into that as well, into the mix there. On the way back from my daughter's, my sixth sense, if you like, my empathy told me they may not like it that I'm a little bit later back, because I had to pick her up from work and then I popped in to see my grandsons. And sometimes that causes them a few issues, because they want to spill the beans to me right away about how their day's been, or they just want to know I'm there. They don't want to think that I'm not there when they get home from school. Even though they are becoming more independent, they do have that feeling of need of both actually my husband and I being there. Now, clearly when they're 13 and 14, that needs to change. And so we're gradually eking that out a little bit. But on the drive back from my daughters, I was thinking to myself, do you know what? They may not like the fact that I wasn't there when they came home today. That partly was it, I think, but partly other things had happened. Now, as I drove into my drive, it started to rain and I saw my younger son having an absolute hissy fit on his bike. I couldn't work out exactly what was going on, but what I could tell was going on, he was really annoyed with my husband. So I was thinking, oh gosh, from a traditional parenting point of view, could have got out of the car, we could have had all guns blazing there and then. And I can be quite fiery, so that was a possibility. But I was feeling quite tired anyway, and I was thinking, is this to do with the fact that I haven't been here already? So I'm trying to be empathetic toward how he may be feeling, not how I'm feeling. Is there a reason why he's losing it really, really quickly? So in other words, has something happened at school? And I know I'm using curiosity, but mainly I'm feeling it in my heart that there may be something wrong, and that's empathy. Feeling how he may be feeling. So then we get inside and it transpires, to cut a long story short, that something's happened on the gears of his very, very new bike, and he's very, very angry. So I take a little bit of time to talk to my husband, and then using my empathy, I go in and see him in the lounge and I say, okay, calm down, you're not going to be left without a bike if this bike is broken. We're not saying you've broken this bike. That's the other thing that might happen in his head. I know from him that if he gets that guilt and that shame feeling happen to him, even if he hasn't done anything, it spirals him out of control. So I'm using my empathy here to think he might be feeling guilt, shame. Maybe he has been jumping the gears a little bit. Maybe he thinks he's to blame for breaking this bike. Well, it's a brand new bike. It's an adult bike. If he's managed to wreck the gears just by experimenting or jumping the gears, well, the bike's not all that, is it? And we, spent a lot of money on it. So I said to him, regardless of what happens, that bike will go in. We'll try to get it fixed. If it's not fixed, we get our money back and we get a new bike. You're not going to be left without a bike, so it's going to be okay. And then is there anything else wrong? He kind of went quiet. I'm like, it probably is. And my gut instinct tells me actually that there is something wrong at the moment because he didn't settle to sleep at night and so on. But using my empathy, something's telling me that it's not that he's just being badly behaved. It's not that he just can't control his anger, although that is true. It's not just about the bike, that there's probably more going on. And so putting myself in his in his shoes, it's probably around friendships. And this is how you're using your empathy. So that's from a parental perspective. You pause, you try and put yourself into their shoes and work out what might be going on in their life before you put sanctions in place, before you put boundaries in place. But the caveat on that is you still do have to put sanctions in place and you still do have to put boundaries in place, because P.A.C.E cannot work without that. The child has to know that you are the adult and that you're in control. So I need to put that in there in case everybody thinks that this is just the nicey parenting approach. You never have to actually say, because that's happened now, you're not going to get any consequences, because there have to be consequences. That's the empathy from an adult point of view. Now let's talk about empathy from the child's point of view. If you're dealing with children with childhood trauma, or you're adopting or fostering, or you are parenting a child who's gone through significant trauma in their life, then you will begin to understand that empathy seems to develop later with them. If you have a toddler or a very young child, you will realise they don't always get consequences at all. When I was working in a nursery, because I was a nursery owner before this, we used to do training for our staff, especially in the toddler room. So staff that had 18 months up to 3, we used to say to them, do not stand next to a child and ask them to say sorry to another child when they've hit them, because they don't get it. And so many staff would be like, but surely they need to understand what they've done. And I would explain to them, you can ask them to say sorry. They know from looking at your reaction that you're not happy and that they need to say sorry, but they don't feel it in here. They don't feel what it feels like for the other child that they've just stood on their foot. they don't get it because developmentally they're not there yet. There comes a point when empathy naturally develops in children, and it varies across the ages. And I'm going to say around about 3.5 to 4, they start to get an idea of maybe something they've done. If it was done to them, they'd understand how it feels. But with children that suffer from developmental trauma, which is often the case for those who are adopted and fostered, it happens later. And for some children, it happens way later. And I can honestly say, for my boys, we're only really talking a few years back where I started to see real understanding, especially from the younger one, that actually the way what he's saying and what he's doing, he's actually understanding in himself how he would feel if he did it to someone else, how he would feel. But we're not there yet. We're a long way off. Let me give you another example. I like to give you examples because then you know I'm talking from my heart and I'm talking from my experience. I had a funeral on Friday and my mum was looking after the boys. Now this was a really close friend, someone I'd known from childhood. I don't have that many really close friends, but he was a very close friend. So it was tough, and he was only my age, so only 54. It was tough, and I knew it was going to be tough. Before I went to the funeral, my younger son said about us, he wanted me to ask whether the grandchildren, who are 4 and 5, could stay over Saturday night. And they haven't actually stayed. It's weird, I can't go into it, but they've not stayed over before together. And I said to him, I don't think so, because I think after the funeral I'm going to be very drained, very tired, and it's only the next day, and it's a lovely idea, but I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. Now, what I should have said, okay, this is from experience, I know I should have said no, because in my heart I very much doubted I was going to want to have an extra responsibility in the house, feeling when I'm still grieving. But I didn't say no. I said I don't think so. You have to be so direct sometimes. It sounds cruel, but you have to be so direct. So I picked up my boys from my mum. As soon as I walked in, he said their names, and I was momentarily confused, and I thought he meant were they at home at our house when I was picking them up from my mum's. So I said, what do you mean? Why are you saying their names? And he said, can they stay over tomorrow? Now, bearing in mind that they'd been to school, they'd been to my mum's for a few hours, and we'd picked them up later than we normally do. They normally come back for tea on a Friday, and we'd pick them up at 7 o'clock in the evening. Just walked in the door. I'm sure I looked like, well, we won't use the word, but I'm sure I didn't look myself. I certainly didn't feel myself. He didn't even say hello. He didn't even say, how are you? He didn't even give me a hug. Nothing. He just said their names. And all he was thinking about was, I want them to sleep over tomorrow night. Has she thought about this? Even had I arranged it when I'd been at a funeral? So I just said to him, quite sharply to be fair, I've just come back from a funeral. And he just said nothing. And that shows me that even at the age of 13, he still is developing empathy. Now, there are lots of children like that, I realise. If you're not a foster carer or an adopter, you're watching this channel out of curiosity, or you have children, you'd be like, well, my children are like that. My children can be like that. And I know, because I've had 5 birth children, I know children can be like that. I know they can just totally not get what adults go through and be totally unhelpful at times. I do understand that. But I've seen a pattern with my birth children, and I've seen a pattern with these boys. And I know that genuinely, he hasn't developed enough empathy to be thinking about how I'm feeling at that point. So we still have a long way to go. And incidentally, this is why for this particular son, we had him assessed for autism, because of, at times, a complete lack of empathy and other things as well. But that can obviously be a trait. When I say obviously, that can be a trait with children who have autism as well. But anyway, in this situation, that's not the case. He doesn't have it. And I'm just trying to explain that I've believe that birth children who've not experienced childhood trauma will develop, more than likely develop it quicker than children who've experienced early childhood trauma, and he has that diagnosis. So there's an example for you. I guess I'm saying is if you have a child in the house who is young and you've adopted them or fostered them, and you're going through difficulties trying to get your children to understand how other people are feeling and how consequences have an effect, you won't be alone in that. And there has to be a lot of patience on your part, a lot of empathy back. So this is where the empathy goes between the two of you. You're going to need a huge amount of empathy, as is in P.A.C.E, to be able to encourage and nurture empathy in the children that you're caring for, because it's going to be later developing. So I hope that's helped you. Please subscribe if you want to. Channel membership is open on my channel. If you think my channel could be useful to you, check out the rest of the videos, and I'll see you on Fly Little Birds. Thank you.